Commander Kale Veyron had designed the program to break them. That was not a cruel impulse, it was practical. The Galactic Defense Consortium had spent 3 standard cycles debating whether humanity was fit for integration into the Joint Military Corps. The arguments in favor were thin: humans were clever, adaptable, and numerous. The arguments against were overwhelming: humans came from a Class 4 Deathworld, which should have left them traumatized, fragile, and grateful for the relative safety of civilized space. Instead, they had arrived at the consortium's recruitment station with too much energy, too many questions, and an attitude Kale could only describe as cheerful. It was deeply suspicious. The solution was the Crucible, a multi-stage gauntlet on Veth 4, a planet with 17 distinct biomes, all of them hostile. Razor crystalline flora. Atmospheric pressure swings capable of collapsing a standard issue shelter in 40 seconds. Indigenous megafauna with 4 layers of armor plating. The consortium had used it for decades to wash out recruits from species that lacked discipline. The failure rate was 83%. Kale had bet on 90% for the humans. He had been generous. He would later reflect, catastrophically wrong. Cadet Mara Ellison hit Veth IV's soil at 0600 local time, and her first words, picked up clearly by the monitoring equipment, were, "Oh wow, these crystals are gorgeous." Kale watched from the orbital command station, already rubbing the bridge of his secondary sensory cluster. Behind him, his junior analyst Tef whispered something about preliminary psych assessments. Kale waved it off. The crystals in question had shredded the atmospheric probes on descent. They were not gorgeous. They were lethal. Mara Ellison was apparently incapable of telling the difference. The 22 human cadets fanned out from the drop zone with a competence that was annoying on its own. No panic at the thin oxygen mix, they had compensators, and had clearly drilled with them. No hesitation at the temperature differential, which swung 40 degrees in the first hour as the twin suns moved through opposition. They set up a perimeter in 11 minutes, 12 seconds. The consortium record for any species was 14. Beginner's luck, Kale told Tef. Wait for the fauna contact. The first fauna contact came at 0743, when a Veth crawler, 3 meters of armored predator, 9 claws, notoriously immune to standard energy sidearms, emerged from the crystal ridge and charged the forward position. Cadet Mara Ellison, who had apparently drawn perimeter watch, looked at it for approximately 2 seconds. Then she sidestepped the charge with a movement that the motion sensors clocked as faster than standard consortium combat training produced, grabbed a ridge crystal barehanded, Kale noted, the edges could sever fingers, and drove it into the gap between the crawler's second and third armor plate. The animal fled. Mara watched it go with her hands on her hips. The audio feed carried her voice clearly. Okay, that's more like it. This place is actually kind of fun. Behind Kale, Tef had gone very quiet. By day 3, Kale had stopped betting on failure percentages. He had started studying the feeds with something closer to academic alarm. The humans had not merely survived the Crucible's first phase. They had reorganized it. Mara, apparently elected by informal consensus as the group's tactical lead, had mapped 3 of the 17 biomes in the time the program allotted for establishing a base camp. She had cataloged fauna behavioral patterns on a salvaged datapad. She had, and this was the part that made Kale pull up her personnel file again to make sure she was not, somehow, a plant, she had started a competition among the cadets for who could identify the most new crystal formations. They were having a scavenger hunt. On a Deathworld. During a survival exercise. The atmospheric pressure event hit on day 4, exactly as scheduled. Kale watched the sensors spike with something between professional satisfaction and guilty hope. Pressure drop, critical. Shelter integrity, compromised in 4 sectors. Even experienced consortium soldiers lost people to this stage. The humans, he had to replay the footage to believe it. The humans had apparently noticed the barometric readings 2 hours before the event, because Mara had looked up at the sky, said something to the cadet on her left, and then calmly directed the entire group to reinforced positions using the crystal ridges as natural windbreaks. When the pressure wave hit, they were already braced. When it passed, they cheered. Cheered. Kale filed an incident report and then immediately deleted it, because he did not know how to categorize cadets' expressed positive emotional response to near-death atmospheric event. The Day 7 briefing with consortium oversight was the hardest professional conversation of Kale Veyron's career. Failure rate, the senior observer asked. 0, Kale said. A long silence. Commander Veyron, the Crucible has never produced a 0 failure rate. I am aware. Not even the Theron cadets, and they have 4 hearts. I am also aware of that, yes. Another silence. Kale had prepared a full report: environmental adaptation rates, combat response times, injury statistics. The injury statistics were perhaps the most damning. Across 22 cadets and 7 days on Veth 4, total serious injuries numbered 2. Both had been treated by the cadets themselves. One of the injured, Cadet Ellison, who had taken a crystal laceration to her right forearm on Day 5, had apparently cleaned and sealed the wound, muttered something about having had worse from her mother's rose garden, and gone back on patrol within the hour. He presented all of this. The senior observer listened without expression. What is your assessment of their fitness for integration? She asked finally. Kale looked at his data. He thought about the scavenger hunt. He thought about the cheering. I think, he said carefully, that we designed a program to simulate a death world. And humans come from one. We were not testing whether they could survive extreme conditions. He paused. We were testing whether they could survive our version of extreme conditions, which is, compared to what they actually grew up with, apparently, recreational. The senior observer looked at him for a long moment. Are you saying we need a harder program? I'm saying, Kale replied slowly, that I'm not certain a harder program exists. Not one we could run ethically. And I am not sure that should stop them from serving. On Day 8, the final phase of the Crucible began, a forced march across the crystalline wastes to the extraction point, 40 kilometers, no resupply. The record crossing time, set by a Theron unit 12 years prior, was 19 hours. Mara Ellison's unit crossed it in 13 hours and 44 minutes. They arrived at the extraction point singing. Kale did not recognize the song. He had Tef look it up. A marching cadence. Human military tradition. Estimated age, several centuries. He watched Mara step off the transport ramp and into the orbital station, her uniform torn at the sleeve where the crystal had cut her, her face carrying an expression Kale had not seen on a fresh Crucible graduate before. Not relief. Not exhaustion. Not the hollow, shaky pride of survival. She looked satisfied. Like someone who had completed a pleasant hike. She looked up and found Kale's eyes across the debriefing bay. Commander Veyron, she said, and there was no disrespect in her voice, just honesty. I want to be upfront with you. This was genuinely one of the best weeks I've had. When do we get to go back? Kale Veyron stared at her. Somewhere behind him, Tef was making a sound that he suspected, in humans, would be called trying not to laugh. Kale straightened his uniform. He thought of the incident report he had deleted. He thought of 83%, and 90%, and 0. Integration approved, he said at last. Welcome to the consortium, Cadet Ellison. He turned away before she could see that he was, against every professional instinct he possessed, almost smiling. Later that cycle, he filed a formal recommendation to the consortium training board. It was 3 paragraphs long. The final paragraph read: Do not use the Crucible to evaluate human candidates. It is not a sufficient measure of their capability, and the results will mislead you. I recommend instead that we ask them what they find challenging. Whatever they name, build that. Assuming it can be built. Assuming anything can. The board, after much deliberation, tabled the recommendation for further review. Mara Ellison, by then assigned to her first active post, sent him a message 6 weeks later. It contained no text. Only a photograph, a crystal shard, pale blue, the length of her forearm, clearly salvaged from Veth 4 and mounted on the wall above her bunk. She had kept a souvenir. Of course she had.